Hello, welcome to the Self-Learning Podcast by Dr. Sushma Singh. Let us start discussion on Unit 17, Alienation. The concept of annihilation describes the estrangement of individuals from one another or from a specific situation or process. It is central to the writings of Karl Marx and normally associated with Marxist sociology. There are philosophical, sociological, and psychological dimensions to the argument. Hegel provided the philosophical means to overcome the Kantian dualism of is and ought, since for Hegel the actual was always striving to become the ideal. The passage of self-creating, self-knowing idea through history, its alienation through externalization and objectification, and its reappropriation through knowledge, provided Marx with his revolutionary imperative. Turning Hegel on his head and rooting his own ideas in a materialistic version, Marx argued that the humanity is lost in the unfolding historical epoch. Thus, Marx argued that with the advent of communalism, there would be a complete return of individuals to themselves as social beings. Sociological dimension of the term relates more to his argument that entanglement is a consequence of social structures which oppresses people, denying them their essential humanity. Now let us move to the next point, dehumanization of labor. We will now outline how labor is dehumanized in the process of production. The first one is theory of surplus value. Following Adam Smith, Marx distinguished in a commodity two aspects. They have a use value and an exchange value. A commodity is an article which can satisfy one or the other human need, is a use value. But a commodity is not just a useful article which is to be produced and sold in the market, but to be exchanged with other commodities. How to measure the exchange value of commodities which have different use values? What do wheat and linen have in common? One is produced by a peasant, other by a weaver. They are the products of different types of useful labor. What they have in common is that they are both products of human labor in general, what Marx calls abstract human labor. On both products, a certain amount of human labor has been spent that determines their exchange value. The exchange value, or simple the value as distinguished from the use value, consists of the abstract labor incorporated in the commodity. The measure is not the time which the individual laborer may have spent, which may have been above the or below average, but the average time needed on a given level of productivity, what Marx calls the socially necessary labor time. Capitalist production becomes possible when, along with other commodities, labor power can be brought as a commodity. As any other commodity, labor power has a use value for the buyer and an exchange value for the seller. For the buyer, the capitalist, it has the use value that it can work or produce. He uses, he consumes it for this purpose and pays the price, strange enough only afterwards, in the form of wages. For the worker, his labor power has only an exchange value. He cannot use it for his own purposes because he has no means of production, but he can sell it in order to make a living. The exchange value is determined, as in the case of every other commodity, by the labor time necessary for its production or reproduction. That means, in this case, by the cost of the means of subsistence needed to maintain the worker and his children, the future workers. The level of subsistence and of essential needs varies from situation to situation according to the level of development and other factors. The wage covers only what is needed to maintain the laborer, his value, but what he produces is more than that. The difference is called the surplus value. The capitalist appropriates the surplus. To understand this concept of surplus value, it may be helpful to have a look at the historical development. In early history, people produced hardly enough for their own subsistence. As soon as they were able to increase their productivity and to produce a surplus, that is, through cattle breeding instead of hunting, the question arose how this surplus was going to be used. In course of time, it is released a section of people from work for their own subsistence, like chiefs and priests. They became the ruling class. Thereafter, one can analyze the labor of the producers as partly necessary labor, that is, labor for their own subsistence, and partly surplus labor, that is, labor to maintain the ruling class. In the Middle Ages, the serfs worked 3 days on their own land for their own subsistence and 3 days on the lands of the feudal lord without being paid for it. With that surplus labor, they produced a social surplus, which was appropriated by the ruling class. These appropriations can take place in different forms: in the form of kind, as in the case of sharecropping, or in the form of money or rent. In the case of money, it is surplus value. The capitalist tries to increase the rate of surplus value, which can be achieved in two ways: absolute and relative surplus value. Absolute surplus value is produced by the prolongation of the working hours. By such prolongation, the term of surplus labor is expanded. This method is specially applied in the earlier stages of capitalism. We find it still in the organized sector of the industry in India. In the early stages of capitalism, we find the extraction of surplus value without the impressive and conspicuous technological revolution, which characterizes the later stage of capitalist development. The level of technology is still more or less the same as in pre-capitalist society. Most other aspects of society are yet unchanged or only slowly changing. But one decisive thing has changed. The labor process is subordinated to capital. The laborer is no longer an independent producer or a serf tied to the soil. He is under the control of the capitalist in one way or the other. Marx calls this the formal subsumption of labor under capital. Once capital has established its hold and has accumulated sufficiently, it may proceed to the real subsumption of labor. When it starts transforming the process of labor, reorganizing it and bringing it on a new technological level. It may be noted here that this distinction is relevant to the ongoing debate about the dominant mode of production in India. Whereas capitalist farmers in the Punjab get their crops sprayed with pesticides from small aeroplanes. There are sharecroppers in other parts of the India making out a merged existence in ways which seems to belong to a pre-capitalist form of society. But this appearance may be misleading. Even where no technological changes have taken place and where the old society still is alive culturally and ideologically, capital may already be in charge economically. Through the formal subsumption of labor, extracting absolute surplus value. The key to Marx's critique of capitalism is his theory of surplus value, which explains how capital grows by consuming living labor, because only labor power produces surplus value. Its exploitation is the basis for the capitalist system. But labor power is not only an economic factor, as it appears in the calculation of the capitalist. Labor is not only variable capital, labor power is provided by living human beings who have their own needs and aspirations. Capitalism has separated labor and the satisfaction of human aspirations. Labor power is treated as a commodity in exchange for which workers may satisfy some of their most immediate needs. But for Marx, labor itself is the most essential characteristics of human life. Without it, humankind not only cannot survive, it even cannot become human. Human labor is imaginative, it is conscious and not instinctual. We presuppose labor in a form that stamps it as exclusively human. A spider conducts operations that resemble those of a weaver, and a bee puts to shame many an architect in the construction of her cells. But what distinguishes the worst architect from the best of bees is this, that the architect raises its structure in imagination before he erects it in reality. At the end of every labor process, we get a result that already existed in the imagination of the laborer at its commencement. Human labor is social. It is self-realization through the production for others and with others. Isolated individuals cannot survive on their own. Productive interaction with nature requires cooperation division of labor and exchange. In the process, the human species realizes itself. One might even say that the meaning of labor lies in this self-realization of human species. As a social process, human labor creates society in its various forms, but as such, it is also conditioned by society in their different forms. In the course of history, the development of class society threatens the human quality of labor. The climax of this threat is reached in capitalism, the main target of Marx's critique. Now let us move to the next point, emergence of classes. When humanity first developed fire, it took thousands of years to complete the process, being able to turn heat back into the motion. The same kind of process can be seen in the development of classes. When human beings begin to organize themselves in accordance with their relations of production, the division of labor, classes in society formed based on the different positions and roles the human beings found and created themselves. What once was a society with little or no class structure, that is, tribal or nomadic society, became a society that split and divided itself into a diversity of classes, fulfilling a broad range of productive roles. The motion of nature dialectics applies in class development as it applies in all things. As the productive forces of humans increased and class distinctions deepened and divided further, soon the advancement of the productive forces reached such heights that certain classes were no longer necessary. The small craftsperson and shop owners were pushed out of existence by the advancement of modern industries that could produce a much greater quantity at much lower cost. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels explained the processes of change brought forth by industrial revolution just beginning to unfold in a particular direction. Modern industry has converted the little workshop of the patriarchal master into the great factory of the industrial capitalist. Masses of laborers crowded into the factory are organized like soldiers. As privates of the industrial army, they are placed under the command of a perfect hierarchy of officers and sergeants. Not only are they slaves of the bourgeois class and of the bourgeois state, they are daily and hourly enslaved by the machine, by the overlooker, and above all, in the individual bourgeois manufacturer himself. The most openly this despotism proclaims gain to be its end and aim, the more petty, the more hateful, and the more embittering it. The increasing improvement of machinery, even more rapidly developing, makes their livelihood more and more precarious. The collisions between the individual workmen and individual bourgeois alike take more and more character of collisions between two classes. Thereupon the workers begin to form combinations, trade unions against the bourgeois. They club together in order to keep up the rate of wages. They find permanent associations in order to make provision beforehand for these occasional revolts. Here and there, the contest breaks out into riots. Now and then, the workers are victorious, but only for a time. The real fruit of their battles lie not in the immediate result, but in the ever expanding union of the workers. This union is helped on by the improved means of communication that are created by modern industry and that place the workers of different localities in contact with one another. It was just this contact that was needed to centralize the numerous local struggles, all of the same character, into one national struggle between classes. This alienation can, of course, only be abolished given two practical premises. For it to become an intolerable power, that is, a power against which men make a revolution, it may necessarily have rendered the great mass of humanity propertyless, and at the same time should have produced the contradiction of an existing world of wealth and culture. Both these conditions presuppose a great increase in productive power, a high degree of its development. Now, let us wind up the session and take rest. Thank you very much for engaging yourself with the Self Learning Podcast.